Welcome back to Awakened Exchanges. I'm your host, Jay Rich, and I'm actually recording this episode in Austin, Texas, and I'll apologize in advance for any random noises as I'm actually recording out of my hotel room right now. And I actually just had maid service right as I attempted the first round of this. So I'm nearing the end of my stay here and preparing for the amazing stops I've got planned for the trip back to Portland. After spending a few weeks here in Austin, I think I'm definitely honing in on the future home of Awakened Exchanges and the ARC community. I'm incredibly grateful for all of the amazing experiences that I've got to have here, and that includes getting to hang out with a bunch of comedians that were more than gracious. Adam Ray, Brian Redband, very nice people. Very glad to have been here and got to see them perform a few times. Personally, things have been going very well this year, and I truly appreciate all of you helping the podcast and Vapes continue to build steam. If you have any suggestions for topics or guests, though, I do listen to the listeners, so please email me from our website or contact me on Twitter at Awaken Exchanges. This is our first episode after the long Great Awakening map series, and I hope you enjoy the change of pace for these next couple of interviews. We will be having some more deep dive episodes coming down the road as well, but I hope to have a diverse and interesting schedule for the rest of the year. I hope you keep joining us back here for the exchange. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the intro this week, but I do want to talk a little bit about this continuing COVID crisis that we're going through. We were trending in the right direction for a good chunk of the year, and here in the United States, things seem mostly okay. But I really hope that people are still taking things seriously. Outbreaks are still happening, and mutations could nullify a lot of the vaccinations that we've got going on. I know that a fair amount of people have already gotten the vaccine. I even got the Johnson & Johnson vaccine myself. I don't know, don't get me wrong. I was a little hesitant, and I can completely understand that hesitancy for any of us to trust a vaccine that we reduce the completion time by up to 90%. But I do think it's still a necessary step in order to contain the variant and any potentially more serious spread down the road. I just hope that people remember the lessons from a century ago. If we consider 2020 the beginning, like 1918 for the flu pandemic, then it would be the fall and winter of 2021 where we could see a similar mutation and spread of the virus like they did. Let's be really clear about that pandemic a century ago. It's thought to have started in 1917 in the trenches of World War I, and then mutated into a slightly deadly version in the spring of 1918 in, I want to say, Kansas at an army base. Then it was the massive flu deaths coming in the late 1918 and 1919. They say there were actually 4 waves. So if 2020 was only the 1917 in this scenario instead of 1918, then we could be in store for massive mutations and a much higher death rate with people getting sick of precautions. I highly doubt they're going to want to try and go back into a quarantine kind of situation. Lots of things are opening back up, and we see situations like India where there's simply no immediate way to slow it down. If a variant escapes that finds its way around the vaccines, then we're all back at square one. We could be getting yearly shots for a while, or even worse, it may just be what we have to do. That said, I think we need to remember to follow the science. Right now, science says that if you're outdoors and vaccinated, it's okay to be, without a mask at this point. Unless you're in a huge crowd, standing right next to people, things like that. If you've got space, then, take that as it is. Sun still seems to kill the virus, and good air circulation keeps it from spreading. So you can afford to be outside and a little bit less cautious if you're already vaccinated. It's about getting to that herd immunity, which it seems like science is starting to say we may not actually reach at this point. So let's not ignore the importance of our own immune systems as well. All right, we have a duty to stay active and keep ourselves healthy so that our immune system can actually respond and fight off infections easier. It's not just about the virus or social distancing or all these things. We need to have a way to balance things where we can stay healthy but also keep businesses open. Yeah, well, I'm probably rambling a little too much, so let's get into a much more pleasant topic. This week's interview with the traveling nobody. John Folak started his career as a cargo pilot, but he has transitioned into being a full-time author and public speaker. He's written a book on the hero's journey within all of us, as well as a 4-book series on psychedelics and journeying within. I want to thank him for coming onto the exchange and sharing this delightful conversation with me. I really did enjoy my time with him, and I hope that you do as well. Before we get to the interview, here's a brief rundown of our sponsors. First off, I want to thank all of you personally for your support. Just listening to this podcast and sharing it with your friends gives me a reason to keep providing the best content that I can. If you have the means and would like to contribute personally, please take a look at our Patreon page where you will get access to exclusive content and deals. As for our other sponsors, Awaken Vapes was the first of the Awaken brands and has been helping you modulate your high with CBD-only, high-terpene vape products since 2019. Genesis Farms has been making the highest quality medicinal RSO among many other fantastic products, starting with the medical community back before 2010. And last but not least, the Caramel Corn Company, bringing you caramel corn the way it was meant to be. And remember, if you enjoy this podcast, please follow us on Spotify, subscribe to us on YouTube, or follow us wherever else you're listening. Please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts if you can. I know every podcast says that, but that's because it really does help spread the word. You can also support us on Patreon or connect with us on the social media of your choice. We are at Awakened Exchanges on Facebook and Instagram, and at Awaken Exchanges on Twitter. All right, now, stay tuned, and thank you for listening to Awakened Exchanges. Genesis Farms was founded on the belief in cannabis's ability to heal. Genesis Farms is more than a brand. They're a compassionate community of like-minded folks that generate top-quality cannabis products, made with love and care. Community outreach is always on their mind, and their partnerships with Grow for Vets and Parents for Pot was just the beginning of what they hope to accomplish in the coming years. You can find their products on the best dispensary shelves across the state of Oregon. Their RSO is the most consistent quality in the state. Their tinctures are second to none, and their personal massage oil will have you and your partner coming back for more. Find them on Facebook and Instagram and ask for them in your local dispensary today. Don't forget to listen to Sean's interview right here on Awakened Exchanges. It's episode number 3. The Caramel Corn Company is bringing you caramel corn the way it was meant to be, made with premium ingredients in small, handcrafted batches and completely gluten-free. Their flavors include original, roasted cashew, salted almond, mixed nut, spicy sriracha, white morsel macadamia, peanut butter, butterscotch, and my personal favorites, chocolate drizzle and raspberry caramel apple. I can't say enough about how delicious this caramel corn is. It makes a great gift any time of the year. You can find them for sale in Portland area Market of Choice locations, and hopefully again online soon when they get stocked back up. Please visit www.caramelcorncompany.com for more information today. And remember, buying local supports small businesses and keeps your money building your community. Last but not least, Awaken Vapes has been bringing you some of the highest quality CBD vapes since ringing in the new year of 2019. I became passionate about cannabis after a car wreck left me with major migraines, and no prescribed pills helped alleviate the symptoms. Having only tried cannabis a handful of times in high school and college, it was a doctor's recommendation that led me to give it another try. Only then did I realize that we'd all been at least a little misled about the health benefits of this amazing plant. Despite an unexpected break because of the vape ban and then a global health crisis with COVID, the business is stronger than ever, and we invite you to check out our updated website today. We are still offering our 3 varieties with new and improved terpene formulations for enhanced flavor to go along with the custom blended effect profiles. Check back at www.awakenedvapes.com for any updates, and you can always email us about wholesaling or white labeling opportunities. Hey, John, welcome to Awakened Exchanges. I'm so grateful that you were able to join us today on the podcast.
Thank you, man. I appreciate being here.
So you started your work in this world as a cargo pilot. How'd you get into that?
Yeah, well, the real start for me there was aviation, for sure, just for clarity.
Okay.
And I got that idea, I suppose, as I got my first call to adventure in the world.
Okay.
And what this basically looked like, in short, was I was fresh out of high school. I had no idea what to do. I really didn't have any productive guidance in that way whatsoever, what to do with your career, yourself, for life. Yeah. So in the absence of that, I just went to junior college. First 2 years, it seemed to make sense, knock out some core classes. I kind of had the idea that I suppose I was going to go to college. I just didn't know which way or what angle. And anyway, I sat down in frustration at one point. And so I suppose this was the first time I sunk into a kind of meditation.
Okay.
Yeah, and in that space, I essentially was given the idea from the Know Not Where, the ethers, to pursue aviation. And I thought about it a little bit, and I thought, why not? I applied, and then from there on out, of course, I was met with many challenges along the way, but that was essentially the path that ended up starting my real life's journey, I think, in many ways. Yeah.
So how did you go about the aviation side?
Well, at that point, I was just finishing up those core education classes, so I needed to do that anyway. So I had about a semester left of doing that, and in that time frame, I applied to a college that was in Southern Illinois. I was living in Chicago. That's where I was born and raised. Yeah.
Awesome.
So Southern Illinois College had an aviation program.
Oh, cool.
And they accepted me for basically like the following term.
My best friend in high school decided to forego college, and he went into the Army as an avionics mechanic, and then he ended up doing a few tours flying Blackhawks over there. So he's still doing contract repair kind of stuff out there for the Army, but scary when you start thinking about all the overseas stuff, you know?
Exactly, and that was definitely an avenue I was never too particularly interested in, just the military route.
So how did you decide to go in the cargo
Well,
side?
that was just the life path. So much of this, as it pertains to what became seemingly my journey, was just living out elements of the hero's journey. And oftentimes, you just don't know what you're doing. Right?
No, you stumble through and you find your path as you go.
That's exactly right. So this was just a more formal stumbling for me at that point. So college wrapped up. I went to that school for 2 years, and everything was good. Made some connections, got the degree that I sought. And I came back to Chicago now, not fully knowing what to do next. Eventually, I got hired flight instructing.
Okay.
There at Midway Airport in Chicago. I lived very close to Midway. It's
Very
one
cool.
of the second major airports there.
Yeah, O'Hare and Midway.
Right. O'Hare's a little bit farther from me, but I was pretty close, a couple miles away from Midway as my childhood house. So I got hired instructing there, and I did that for about a year until I just reached extreme burnout. I just couldn't take it anymore. And that caused me to just network through students, really, people I was teaching and actively engaged with there. And I got a connection to a job in Kansas City, which was essentially aerial mapping, which that company was great. That was in many ways a bubble in the world. That was like one of the most positive versions of the unknown that I jumped into. It was a job where we essentially mapped cities in the U.S. and in Canada with pictures, and it was contracted through Google. The pay was good enough.
Cool.
Yeah, and the time that we worked was great, week on, week off schedule. And then even when we were working, there wasn't really a lot of work at hand because conditions had to be pristine for us to actually work. So it gave me a lot of time to explore other things and to read and to really just get to start to know myself, essentially.
Yeah. A lot of people don't get to spend that time, learning who they are.
Right. And that opened up a lot of other avenues, I think, along the journey. And so specifically what came from that was my first love, and then that turned into my first heartbreak and depression, which led me to seek natural cures for that, which led me really into the supernatural aid portion of my journey, which would have been exploring the psychedelics.
Let's talk a little bit about that. When did that start for you?
That was 2013, I would say, if I was to put the beginning, if I was to put a real pin in that. That was when I was working that job at the time. Things were pretty good financially, my life and everything else. But then I was smashed with heartbreak. Yeah, and
I've been there. We all have at some point, I'm sure.
It's rough, right? I mean, and that is the unknown too. Because for me, and I think for a lot of young men, this is not uncommon. You're just carrying certain worldviews, certain models into your relationship, and they've previously served you in the past. They've worked with your friendships, as
absolutely,
young men, right?
Yeah,
and then they don't work any longer, and the inevitable consequences of that is you're shown in some way that. Through catastrophe, and that's what it was for me. So there was no real repairing that. I had to accept it, and then I had to essentially build back with something that would at least not deliver that same exact problem or set of catastrophes in my life.
The way you just said that actually reminds me of something I've been really focused on the last couple of years, and that's the imagery of the phoenix. You know, where you get burnt down to the ground. You have to get rid of everything, but you have to rise back up and come through those challenges as a new being, really.
Right. The renewal.
Yes.
The death and rebirth, which is a constant theme, of course, with the use of any kind of worldview reevaluation, but certainly with the psychedelics, obviously, too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So after the heartbreak, you got into psychedelics a little bit.
Right. That started my path of questioning, and it was simply because I wasn't going to go any kind of mainstream psychiatric route.
Okay.
So that wasn't going to be a part of my process, and I think I just Googled cures for depression.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I think it was as simple as that. And it might have been any number of things that started leading me to it, but I do think I was doing that at one point.
Did you have any previous like cannabis experience with there or anything?
Oh,
Nothing.
I did not. Yeah,
Okay.
I was an alcoholic. That was my drug of choice. Yeah,
I have that in my family, so I'm very aware of my tendencies. So I went with the cannabis side, ended up going that direction. But
that's probably the wiser, for sure. Yeah. So yeah, man. Interestingly enough, I didn't. I never had smoked weed before. I had never taken any of the psychedelics, of course, before. I didn't have any aversion to necessarily, or I suppose I did because I never used them, but I never thought about them as being evil.
No, but you get that, it's just the stoners that use that.
You do. Yeah, so I did fall under that war on drugs programming for sure.
Oh, for me too. I actually didn't start using until I was in a massive car accident when I was 23. I hit the back of my seat in my 66 Mustang so hard I ripped the seat out of the floor and came forward, smashed my head. Eventually, I ended up getting migraines about a couple weeks later, and they would last 2-3 days at a time, take me out of commission completely. And after a year or so, a doctor finally just kind of said, "Have you tried weed?" And I'm like, sure, I guess I can, not since high school, but and that kind of led me into the medical cannabis world in 2005, 2006.
And I take it that's been pretty helpful for you.
Very much so. In fact, it's almost been prophylactic as far as the migraines and headaches are concerned. If I go a few weeks without having anything, sometimes I'll start to get one of the visuals that comes across. But then I just go smoke a little bit and it goes away. It never develops into a full-blown migraine anymore. So
yeah, it's amazing how much of a medicine cannabis truly is.
We used to get so many cannabinoids in our bodies because we fed our beef, hemp. We fed, all of the meat. We also grew, we had it in our medicine, we had it everywhere. And then for 100 years, we've just ignored it because of William Randolph Hearst and all the reefer madness era. So it's been interesting to see the studies coming out now saying that a lot of these chronic pain, chronic illness kind of things are being linked to cannabinoid deficiencies because our endocannabinoid system is so intricately linked to our nervous system that we just don't talk about it. But I think that the next decade or so, there's going to be a lot more change, a lot of people getting informed.
Yeah, certainly it seems that way, especially just with more states going legal recreationally.
I keep wondering if Texas is going to head that route. Even their medical program seems fairly tight at this point.
You would never know that weed is not legal.
At least not in Austin.
Yeah. Truly, you go anywhere on a hike or on a trail, the lake, you just gonna smell it. There's clouds of
Austin, I was offered fairly quickly, "Oh, do you have some?" "Oh, I brought some on my road trip. Thanks, though."
Nice, man. Yeah, that kind of does speak to the vibe here.
It does. So what was your first experience like with the
So yeah,
psychedelics.
so getting right back to it, and we could continue to branch
Please.
off with cannabis too, because I do liken cannabis to being a sort of mind manifester, a kind of psychedelic. It has been for me.
I use it definitely for meditations and, keeping myself balanced as opposed to letting my mind run away with itself.
I do too these days. Yeah, the same way. Yeah.
Very cool.
So from the heartbreak and then searching what might be a natural cure for this, I came to psilocybin, the active drug in the magic mushroom.
Absolutely.
And there has been shown to be benefits for various kind of psychological disorders. And I think more than anything, just the basic take that I was coming to it from was I was in essentially a loop, right? That's what a lot of depressive cycles are. They're loops that you can't really get out of, even though you might want to.
Much like the depression, I liken it to anxiety. A lot of people have experienced the stress and anxiety. It's that circular motion. You start getting in your head. You start reinforcing those negative thoughts, and it's the same with the depression. It's just a different cycle.
That's absolutely the way that I saw it to be presenting itself in my life. And not only that, it was like just what I said, you can't stop it. Even though you know there are reasons for it not having to exist, it just has a momentum of its own. So at least with the ways that I had to deal with it, which were just meditation, which I'm not trying to take anything away from, that was helpful.
It is, but it takes a lot more to do meditation alone, and a lot of time that Westerners like us haven't really been involved in most of our life.
That's exactly right. And in short, that's probably what catapulted me right to the mushroom. Now, it took a while. I had to look into it for about 1.5 years.
Okay.
Before
so you actually did some research.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I did. And it wasn't because I was researching it necessarily the whole time. It was more realistically, I'll check that out. Looked at it a little bit, right? Saw some of the benefits. Thought, okay, it's not toxic, really.
But you had to let it sit in your mind.
Yes. You had to let it sit and grow. And I think that's the way the call to adventure works a lot of the times, too.
Yeah, it takes some percolation.
It definitely does. You might hear it. You might begin to investigate. You might deny that. That's like the refusal of the call, right? And that, as you said, could take some time to percolate before you're motivated enough to really pull the trigger. So to that point, actually, about 1 year later from that heartbreak, I was still drinking at the time. I was still working this relatively comfortable job. And I remember being drunk at the Mall of America, of all places. We were working up there in Minneapolis. And I suppose it was a fine enough adventure. I was out there with a friend. We went to a comedy bar at night. But I remember waking up the next day and just eating some terrible lunch at the hotel bar. And just, I was sick. I think I was physically feeling just run down, basically.
Worn out,
knowing almost my soul, knowing this is not good. This is not good for you. Or just my mind. My mind basically knew this too. And so at that point, I committed to understanding how to grow the mushroom and then doing it.
Oh.
Yeah.
So you actually grew your own.
I did. And
oh, wow.
Yeah. So from there until about the next 6 months or so, it took me to learn how to do that, a little bit of trial and error process, and then to successfully have my own.
How did that go for you?
It went okay. There was a little bit of a learning curve, but it worked. And so then once I had it, I had to explore it. I had to consume it and see what kind of benefits I would get. So that was a little miniature road of trials. It took me 3 attempts to really break through with the mushroom. So the first time I took it, it was a light amount. And just to put some rough numbers on this, it was about a dried gram of the mushroom, which is pretty light and exploratory. Yeah. Introductory.
I use that. That's kind of my microdose level when I do that at this point. About 2.5 grams is where I start to actually notice the effects enough where I feel it, you know. What about you? What was...
It was similar at that point in time. Okay. Yeah, so the gram amount I took wasn't enough to do much. And of course, I didn't use it in the most constrained setting. I took it and I went out to a bar to meet people. I didn't know what I was doing.
No, right? we all do. We're like, let's watch a movie with a friend, you know, let's do whatever.
And that ended up being the next couple but exactly. It just didn't quite deliver. And I suppose I sort of noticed a few things, or just maybe inner thoughts that might not have normally come to the front and center, but not much. So the next day I did kind of what you said there. I doubled it. I went to about 2.5 grams. And that, It delivered more, but I think, went out to a bar at the end of it.
Well, and you're doing it close together, so your body, things like that.
There's, something in that as well, too. You do develop that tolerance pretty quickly. Yeah.
In fact, I've recently found acid as well as psilocybin have a cross-tolerance issue. So if you do them too close together, you still don't feel the effects either.
Really?
So, yeah, even if if I'm planning it out, I will wait at least 3 days in between either of them.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. That becomes challenging. I don't know if you've ever gone to any of the Burning Man events.
I want to, but I haven't gone yet.
Yeah, because when you're there, it's like when in Rome.
Exactly. Just fuck it.
You don't want to waste those 3 days.
No. There's a Oregon Country Fair. Started in, I want to say, 1979. The Grateful Dead showed up and they started playing this thing. Is that 1979? It had to be earlier than that because they had their 50th anniversary in 2019. So I was there I've been there a few times, but that's very much the same vibe. It's mushrooms and acid and everything all over the place. People in, makeup and costumes and just, it's a different experience to be on mushrooms in a setting with as open as that. Let's go there.
Yeah, right. But it's worthwhile, right?
It is, absolutely. Yeah. The community feel is different.
It's certainly different. That's one of the first things I noticed about those events is just that undeniable feeling of home.
Yes.
They often tell you that, welcome home, when you come into it. Yeah.
You're here, you're one of us.
Yeah, absolutely. So the second go with the mushroom was, like I said, delivering a little bit more. I recall being in a bar at that point, too, and I was with a friend who wasn't taking the mushroom, but who was aware that I was. And I remember that was one of the first times that I sort of became totally detached from myself. So it was, in effect, I suppose. And I just remember watching myself as well as the conversation we were having, and then everyone in the bar being sort of like actors, playing their roles. And
when you realize the world is a stage, and you're like, oh, that's what they meant by it.
That's the exact Shakespeare quote I used to describe that trip report. And it was just fitting for the exact reason that you put forth too. That's what it seemed like. The world was a stage. All men and women have their roles. They have their parts.
We're all sitting there with what we want to happen, and we're acting towards what we think is going to get us to that direction, as opposed to necessarily just being genuine all the time. You kind of have those fears and questions and, is this person going to like me? Or is this person, going to think I'm weird or whatever else? It's interesting to get in your head there.
Right. You're really upholding a lot of the cultural expectations. And I think the antidote to that is what you just said, too. If you can engage in it as much as is possible, a kind of radical authenticity helps at the very least break you into something that is more real, that almost seems to have more tangibility to it in some sense, more meaning, certainly.
I also think, and I think we'll get to this later, but can open up some of those portals.
Yes. I think that's a precursor or a requirement maybe for actually getting into opening up some of those portals. Right. So that was the second time around, but it still didn't deliver anything that I had read about or that I was seeking for. And what I mean by that is I had come to expect a real life-changing experience.
Now, had you been reading like Terence McKenna?
Yeah, a lot of McKenna. He was probably one of my first entry points, Terence and Dennis McKenna for sure.
Definitely Terence, Time Wave Zero and all of the stuff that I heard about. Actually heard about that as a kid and had been fascinated. Read a little bit more on Dennis, especially over the last decade or so. And on a random tangent here, he actually does an ayahuasca retreat in South America that he hosts a few times a year. It's like a week-long thing.
At Soltara, do you know? Or do you know what
I don't know which one that is. I'd have to look it up. It's in my email at this point. But it's been, if I'm going to do it, that's what's been calling out, Do it with somebody that has that kind of experience and that kind of a level to usher you into it.
For sure, man. Yeah, I think Dennis was associated with, at least in some way, a place called Soltara, which is Costa Rica.
Okay.
And they're a center that is pretty darn well known for being one of the better ones there are out there. So, Yeah, I've looked into it as well.
Have you experimented with that at all?
Ayahuasca I have in Costa Rica, but not there. I was at a different center. Yeah, and actually one other time too in the States, I found a traveling group of people who did it.
We'll have to get to that.
Yeah.
So, but please go.
But yeah, so back to the mushroom. So the third time that I dove in, I was really looking to get a breakthrough experience, meaning to experience the transcendent, the mystical. I just quite had not touched on it until that third go. So what I did for that third time is now I had the sense enough. I'm going to stay at home. I'm going to limit my situation and just try to embrace the medicine. So I doubled the dose about again. So it was now close to the heroic dose. Like
almost 5 grams. And
it was in there somewhere. It actually wasn't in all reality, it wasn't. I still took about 3 grams, but I mixed it with lemons. I don't know if you ever heard of this.
No.
The idea behind this is referred to as the lemon tech in these mushroom circles. And what you're doing is you're allowing the citric acid from the lemons to mix with the mushroom. And
so more bioavailable, maybe?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know if it's necessarily more bioavailable, but what it's starting to do is break the psilocybin down into psilocin.
Okay.
Essentially in the cup or the glass or whatever. Before this process would naturally happen in the body anyway. It does happen.
Gotcha.
Because psilocin is what is actively really crossing the blood-brain barrier and such. So, or causing the effect, I should say. Yeah. So anyway, so that's just happening in a cup or something first, and then when you ingest it, it just gets to work much quicker.
Gotcha.
Some people have told me I'm crazy in this, but I'll just put it out there as a note. I have noticed that this seems to act like doubling the effect. That's why I said, it seemed closer to getting to that like heroic dose amount. Yeah, so if you're ever looking to stretch out as much mileage as you can out of your mushrooms, mix them with lemon, but certainly not for the faint of heart.
I tend to do teas, and I've taken, the highest dose I've ever taken was 14.5 grams. And
oh my God, man.
it was intense. But I also I've tried to write on about 7.5 grams, and it felt like I was pulling it. It like was coming through me as opposed to me writing it down, and that was something where it made a big impression for sure.
Yeah, you were the medium.
Exactly.
That's a very cool thing. I've never experienced myself acting like that through writing, but through conversation I have, where it seems like you were a similar medium, a channel. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's what it was basically. It was like I was having a conversation with myself.
Yeah.
Except it wasn't myself.
Right.
But it was very interesting.
Yeah. Well, a part of the self, perhaps the capital S self. Yeah. So something in there. Yeah.
Yes. Then we get into the source, and 100%.
All the shades of gray between seem to be what we get in touch with some of these tools. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that third time around did it. That 3 grams mixed with the lemons, that broke me through. And I was, in the beginning of it, sitting down, I was watching a movie. I was watching The Doors, the Oliver Stone.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and I couldn't finish it. I couldn't even watch it. I don't know why it was on. I think from the day previous, actually. When I was trying, I started with that movie. But anyhow, the idea there was that I broke through. I remember, of course, walking outside. It was the middle of the day at this point, too. I was watching my concrete driveway swirl with the eddies, and it seemed fluid. It seemed liquid, of course. Yeah. And along with it, though, too, I just finally felt like, this is what was being talked about. This is what I had previously missed. It was firmly and distinctly different from just having these psychoanalytic or philosophical ideas from the day or two previous. So that was great. Eventually, I made it back into my place, and I guess because I was tired, I ended up just laying down, just sporadically, and so closing my eyes. And up until that point, I hadn't done that. Not because I wasn't aware of it. I just suppose I was gripped by the experience. And
You once the visuals start, you want to see the visuals. I mean,
at first, for sure, you're captivated. Yeah,
exactly. That's the right word for it.
You are. Yeah, you're gripped by it. But then eventually, I did go down. I did venture in, and I received some kind of healing, for lack of any other better descriptor. That's what it seemed like. It seemed like I was in touch with the feminine element of the mushroom or the experience or myself, any of these things, I don't know, but it was very feminine and it was very healing. I just felt very cared for, very loved in a nutshell, really. And then I did too notice that it seemed to be able to engage in dialogue And I explored a little bit of that, but I suppose more than anything, what I got from that experience was, wow, there's a lot in there that can be accessed if you come to it.
There's a lot I don't know.
There's a lot I don't know, and there's just a whole wealth spring of potential benefit if you can come to it with a solid intent and then work with it. So I guess in a way what I'm saying is that really launched me. I knew this is going to have to be on my path. But I had sort of recovered from the heartbreak acutely and the depression, I suppose. But now I realized if there is a way that I could continue to go into the other world and be informed with eternal wisdoms and truths, that this is seemingly the way. This would have to be it. So then I just began to use the mushroom over and over and over again, basically with intention and for experience, for the ability to put together a model that would work better than the previous alcoholic and materialist one. And the mushrooms were just helping me do that.
Now, like I still drink on occasion, but I never go to excess at this point anymore. Has that been the case with you for the most part?
I quit cold turkey June 5th of 2016.
Congratulations.
So, thank you, man. Yeah, I appreciate
awesome.
that. Yeah, so
5 years is coming up.
5 years is coming right on up. Yeah. What it basically was for me, I do like to mention this because it was a direct result of using a mushroom and then deciding to try to integrate its lessons, which looked like writing for me. So June 5th came around of 2016, and I was writing the first book that I ended up publishing, and I just said to myself, because I was drunk the night before, out on the road. I was in Atlanta, actually, I remember, and I said, you're either going to write and be a better human, or you're going to drink. That's it. It was really clear.
Wow.
Yeah, it was one of those, I guess, little bits of something that you come into and you kind of say to yourself, that's undeniable. Like, I can't argue with that as much as my animal mind would like to. And in that way, it didn't really seem to be coming from my impression, although my impression was a part of it, but it seemed like a higher bit of wisdom that was put before me. And I felt very fortunate to have that. So I said, okay, well, I have now this task at hand, write this book. And that's what I'm going to do. And that was it. That I saw. Yeah.
That first book, was that The Hero's Journey?
Yeah, Psychedelic Hero's Journey of a Traveling Nobody. That's what that one was.
Yeah.
And it took me about 1.25 years to formally get it done, to write it. So that was the thing I had to do to, I suppose, keep me away from the temptation, which was alcohol.
Now, were you still piloting at the time?
Yeah, I was still working that very cushy, comfortable job, that mapping gig.
Yeah.
That was helpful during this time because I was able to not work that much, and it seemed in many ways like the universe really did present me with every opportunity to write. I just wrote for that 1.25 years. I didn't work much at all. Even when I was on the road, it seemed like we had bad weather constantly, so I just wrote it all out. And that then essentially presented me with the next thing to do in life. And that's often how the journey goes. You don't have to know the whole thing, but just the next breadcrumb is usually enough. Yeah.
That sounds very similar to what's been going on with me the last year, actually. Basically, since October, I haven't been at the full-time cannabis job that I was at. I left there, and I started working almost exclusively on my vape cartridge company, Awaken Vapes. Nice. And from there, all of a sudden, I realized, I'm starting to roll this into there. I'm getting enough kind of income coming in to where I can make the podcast and the vapes my focus. And from there, it's just been the universe opening up. Oh, yeah, you've got enough money. You're not really worried about this. You don't have to think about money. Here's this. Go take your road trip. Take your travel. Take this. Do these next steps. And it's trying to listen to it.
Yeah, those points in the journey are really useful too because it opens you up to new opportunities, obviously, in some basic way. But it seems more than that because it's not just new opportunity. It's like a new way that you can engage with this new world, seemingly. Because we're always getting feedback, of course, from the world based upon what we're bringing to the table, right? So when you're involved in this process of growth and transformation and all that, and then you unplug and you go take a road trip or something like that, now you're really able to unleash some magic because you're going to treat it differently than perhaps you did in the past.
Absolutely.
And then it's going to treat you differently, and then what comes from that is unpredictable entirely. So that's kind of the cool part of all of that.
Definitely agree. Very cool.
Yeah, man.
So what was the next step for you?
So after writing that book, basically what it became was that I didn't know. I guess that was kind of just languishing for a while. It didn't take too terribly long for the Network of Life to dial me up. And what it looked like for me was I had a Facebook group that I was involved with, which had some of the members from the first ayahuasca ceremony that I went to as a part of it. And we, I guess, communicated loosely here or there, but not even usually directly one-on-one. It was more just through the post someone put on or whatever, which was cool. But one of the members sent me a invite, basically, for a traveling ayahuasca group here in the United States. And he remembered where I had lived. At this point, I was living in Kansas City still. So they were going to be in Kansas or Oklahoma within a relatively short drive of my hometown. And he said, hey, you might want to check this out. And that was perfect. That's exactly what I needed. That was the next thing.
So that would have been your second time with ayahuasca.
Right.
Want to tell us a little bit about the first?
Yeah, sorry. I probably put that a little bit out of order. But the first was something that I went to because, as I was telling you, I was exploring the mushroom for a while. And initially it was healing, but in all honesty, it just developed into curiosity. And at one point with the mushroom, I asked to see the all. I wanted to know what the ground level of a being was. And it showed me a representation of the figure eight, essentially.
Yeah.
So it showed me the infinite. And the impression was, this is intelligence consuming itself, feeding itself into itself, and this is it. This is not us. We are the mushroom. You are humans, and we're branches of evolutionary life of it. But we have more knowledge, and if you want to see, this is what it is. And I suppose it was a reflection of me being unable to process that at the time, but I didn't know how to process it. I didn't know what to do with it.
That's a hard thing to process, period. I mean, even when you have an idea, I mean, it's a lot.
No, it is for sure. And I suppose really what I'm trying to get at the heart of, though, was that the feeling was, oh, I guess we are the imagination of ourselves.
That's an interesting phrase. I like that.
Very kind of like Alan Watts, very Buddhist in a sense, and we're just here for the experience. And there's so much that I want to put on top of that. I want to put, it's not just the experience, it's growth and it's the classroom of consciousness and all this. And I think there might be value there. But at that time, all that the experience was telling me was imagination of yourself, basically, for experience. So this left me feeling rather glass half full. And I thought, well, I can't just take their word for it. I'm going to have to go investigate another plant teacher and see what she thinks in this case. So I did. Ayahuasca was the next one on the list. And that was why I went to investigate that question. So
that was Costa Rica, right?
Correct. That was Costa Rica. Yeah, I found a center in Costa Rica. And what really called to me was one of their promotional YouTube videos. They had a song. That they had, and it just really vibed with me. That was it. I didn't have to look into it any more than that. I just felt like, okay, this must be booked.
Yeah.
And then I did, and the rest kind of led into the rest of the journey. So at that ceremony, I was given essentially the same teaching, the infinite. We are the imagination of ourselves, but it was much more concerned seemingly with me, with my emotional construct as the questioner, as the human, the hero, and which we all are. And glass overflowing was the only way to describe it. Just pure, unbound love and bliss in all of that. However, once you get that, what do you do with it, right? Yeah. Coming home. It was also at this center that I met someone who began to refer me to Joseph Campbell's work.
Amazing.
The Hero's Journey. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
And I had maybe listened to a lecture, maybe. I don't even think I knew what the Hero's Journey was, like the cycle of it. So I got back and I thought, I really have to do that. It seems important. And then as soon as I began doing that, paired up with me feeling like I had too much information to just sit on, I realized that I had to outline the story with the Hero's Journey and present it in book form. And then in many ways that took me into what my stance began to evolve into, something of just an everyman explorer of the human condition and of the visionary states paired up with this. And then consciously pulling out of my story what seemed to have been happening anyway, which is consistent with like the Hero's Journey or the archetypal cycle we're all living.
We're all that fool.
Yeah.
Moving along the path, trying to figure out the next steps.
That's it. Yeah, the fool to the hero. And that's the evolutionary path for sure. Seemingly, yeah. And yeah.
So did you, so I got into Joseph Campbell because my degree is in screenwriting. So I was very intimate with the hero's journey and the 3-act structure and things like that. And then you start going, well, the surprises are what really make it, and the ends and all these other things that you're trying to work towards. And then I started diving into Jung and things like that. Ayahuasca has been on my list for a while, but I've had some DMT, but that pre-breakthrough moment. Did you actually get a full blast off into another universe with your experience?
With ayahuasca, both times around, really, yeah. I got the breakthrough, or pretty damn close to what I think the breakthrough is. For sure, the first time. And the second time around, I could elaborate a little bit on that and tell you why I might not have gotten the break completely through the chrysanthemum, as the McKennas would have talked about it. Yeah. You feel like you did break through, though, with your...
I was at the pre-blast off.
So
I was like,
before,
as it was going into there, and my cat turned and looked at me and said, "You're not ready for this." And I was like, "Okay." But it was. It looked like a jackal from the South American tradition at the time. It had transformed into this very Art Deco, almost like landscape around me as she turned and looked. So it definitely made me curious, but it also kind of let me know that, all right, I need to approach it consciously when I do it next time.
That's good, man, that you had that take on it, because you're being really honest with yourself and what you can gain from it. Maybe at that point, it just wasn't the right time.
I was near a heartbreak kind of situation. There were a lot of things that were still in flux. It was probably not the best time to be messing with my consciousness.
Right. Completely smashing it.
Yes.
Right. Understood, yeah. So, yeah, the first time I would say I broke through into an infinite love space, and that is just what that is, right? That was beautiful. Now, the second time around, which brings us back to that traveling ayahuasca group here within the States that I explored, it was just a one-night event. This group had rented a lodge, essentially, in the middle of nowhere, wherever we were in Kansas or in Oklahoma there. And it was cool. Everything was fine, but the experience was dark. It was hellish.
Was it because of the company as well, or?
No, I don't think so. There was obviously a part of me that started to go through that analysis. It's just that animalistic, place blame everywhere else type part.
For me, I'm just like, I know that set and setting are so big that when something like ayahuasca comes into effect, if there's somebody throwing off the vibe somewhere, that you start to feed onto that level. And I was wondering if that still comes through on ayahuasca like it does on mushrooms. Yeah,
supposedly too with Aya, they are known, or it is known to be a group hallucinatory sort of drug, or it can be.
Well, in fact, I think they called it
telepathamine or something.
Yeah, exactly. Because they thought that they were reading each other's minds, and who knows, maybe they were.
Right, or there can be certainly a shared experience. Yeah, that's a very common type of report. So that might have been going on in some way, and I did explore that afterward. But basically, what the experience was it felt like a very dark and hellish space. You can almost think of like the river Styx or something, or all of the dead trying to pull you into. I feel like at one point, that vibe was certainly present. I think there was even a visual of that. And from there, it turned into a carnival hypnosis wall of spiraling. I want to say it was green and white. And I was just watching. This might have been the chrysanthemum. It really might have been. I never had it in front of me in that way before. And now here I was fairly terrified. I didn't know what was happening. Up until this point, I had relatively good trips. I mean, they weren't like this. And this was something totally other. So, and granted, too, I had consumed a good amount of this stuff, and I wanted to make sure that I got everything I needed. And at this point in my life, just to recap on that, I was telling you I had finished writing that first book. I was now working another mapping job. I had finally gotten out of that really cushy one.
Yeah.
Because it dissolved, as all good things do.
They do.
Right. So I was with another mapping company, and this was like more of the real world. So I wasn't content at all with this job. I couldn't do it forever. And I knew that my life lacked direction. So that was one of the reasons that I was going to ayahuasca the second time around. Had written the book, didn't know I was going to write anymore, just didn't know anything. So my life was not all it could be, and I knew it, but I wasn't exactly as conscious of that process, I suppose, as I could have been. And I think this is what was being delivered in a very focused, fear-centric way in this trip, this hell that I was in. So what this amounted to was me throwing these higher order concepts at this wall, this carnival wall. I was saying, well, love. Clearly, there is reality here, right? Truth. Constant of being. No? Compassion. All of these things. Nothing. Stonewalled. I was looking for validation, I suppose, from ayahuasca. Absolutely nothing. I was feeling as if I was alone. I was there in the void, and that's what it felt like too, like the void, right? Like, you don't give a shit about love. The void doesn't care. And
the void's empty.
The void's empty. Yeah, and that was terrifying. That was the first full realization, I guess, I had of that element of existence. Now, I'm not sure, and I'm not making the claim that that's all that there is at the ground of everything. I think that exists within hyperspace, like the void. But I think there are other elements of it that also exist too, and how you navigate to them is based upon how you navigate, and the way you make your choices, your life choices, so forth and so on. So anyway, the teaching at hand really was for me, though, look, if you're not going to have the courage to competently push through the chrysanthemum at that point, physically in the trip, or metaphysically, whatever, or push through in your life to find real fulfillment for yourself, quit your job and go try to accomplish on your own, right? Then you're going to root in a version of this fear, this hell. And in your life, it's just going to be more diluted. But
it's interesting you said that. After one of my last trips, it's kind of come to me that hell is what we make of it, right? Mm-hmm. So it's almost like I see where we're living now as really this plane as the purgatory or the hell, where we're going through these tribulations, and we're actually a lot more responsible for the things that present themselves through our other choices or through our previous choices. And interacting with them consciously can actually open up so many more levels that you just didn't even realize or think about before.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes to the Buddhist notion, too, of samsara and nirvana essentially being the same place. But what's different is, of course, your take on it, your perception, the depth of understanding that you have. And I think you only gain that by actually suffering, too, which is also telling, because that's considered by many religions to be like the core basis of reality, suffering. Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, so for sure. And that just applied to that story as well. It was a suffering that was going on. Changes needed to be made. And if they were not to be, well, I had no one to blame but myself. So coming out of that, I had to eventually quit that job, which was security, stability, and all of that. And I did so, and that was just taking the next call to adventure. And I attempted to launch into real estate, of all things.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, real estate can be fun and rewarding, while you also get to work with your hands if you're going to do any rehab kind of stuff. There's a lot to it. I can see that. That
was part of it. Truly, it wasn't a concrete way. I just wanted to see more of the fruits of my labor as opposed to just flying this grid line pattern back and forth. It just seemed like mindless drone type work.
Yeah.
So that was part of it too. The real part was financial self-sustainability. I didn't want a job. I don't want a job.
I don't blame you. I mean, I want to be able to be creative and communicative and go where I need to go.
Absolutely. And just live authentically on your own terms, essentially. And whatever that looks like is the journey. But you're not having to ask daddy for a salary type thing.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's what it was. Well, I wasn't competent enough to venture into that unknown. I was really naive. And I thought that if I just basically told these people I was working with, so I bought a house is what I did. And it was a fixer-upper, and I was intending to flip it.
Yeah.
And I had some experience with this because I had owned a duplex, which I rented out there in Kansas City. So I had done some work of this nature before. I just bit off way more than I can chew.
Yeah, it happens.
Yeah, it's a part of the call to adventure. You gotta immerse in the unknown and either make it work or not. Unfortunately for myself in the past, I usually got lucky enough to make these situations work, which I say unfortunately because that puts you into a false sense of confidence.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I could do it.
I can do anything.
I could do anything. Right. Well, I couldn't. And I just got smashed over and over again. I realized how dark man is. And I suppose this was because I was too naive to integrate my own shadow. I had sort of rose-colored lenses on. I just assumed the whole world had their 5-gram dose, and they kind of saw infinite love, and they were more or less interested in helping each other.
Yeah, I wish.
Yeah, right. So you see, this was folly based upon me just not having integrated any kind of darkness at all. So I never engaged in that process within myself, I suppose, because I didn't have to. But then when I engaged in this whole deal, I realized I would have to think like a thief and a criminal, because that's what I was working with. Criminal contractors and such, stealing from me and all this.
Hell, Donald Trump made his money by not paying his contractors.
It's just a part of the financial game, man, yeah.
It is, that game. And that's what people don't realize. It is a game.
It is certainly a game, yeah. And I couldn't really play it. And I got a good look at the person who I would have to be to maybe be successful. And I just realized I couldn't do that. I was going to have to fold. I was going to have to take my losses, sell the house and whatever I lost, which was a lot at that point. I would have to move on. So I went back essentially to like bottom of the barrel aviation flight instructing in a summer there, 2018 of Missouri. It was so terrible, so hot, just the worst possible work you'd be doing in aviation. But that was my sort of penance I had to pay. And this caused me to lean on my connections in the world in order to get into something else that would be more sustainable. And I ended up finding a friend here in Austin who had a hookup with a cargo pilot company aviation job, and he essentially wrote me a solid letter and got me in here to Austin. So you see, that is what brought me then to Austin, which really began to catalyze the journey in many other ways that I couldn't have predicted. So it was all seemingly part of the call to adventure and ensuing journey.
So where has it taken you here in Austin?
So I ended up moving here, as I told you earlier, about 2.5 years ago, and now here in Austin, it's given me the opportunity, the job, I'll just address first, to build myself back up financially, to get out of that disaster, which I did. So I corrected all of that. And then it just came to its natural end. This company I was working for the whole time I was here up until February of this year was good for me at the time. It was what I needed to build back up and all of this. But it got to the point where they were just getting increasingly absurd. And I don't think this is anything specific to me. I think the entire world is going through this right now.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's like the machine mind is just taking more and more liberties from us seemingly every day, and certainly within jobs. I have many friends who are unemployed or who have gotten fired because they're just not going to put up with that anymore. It seems to be a grand transition.
My boss used to think, my previous boss before I left in October, used to think I was a very valuable employee because I spoke my mind to him and I told him the truth and I wasn't a yes man.
Used to.
Yes. That was the thing, is I didn't stop speaking the truth or telling him what I thought. And eventually we butted heads enough to where we had to part ways. And I think that also reflects on where he's at in his journey as well as where I'm at on mine. And it's knowing that you can still interact with people and not necessarily take it personally.
Yeah, right.
Which is hard to do in the moment.
Yeah, it certainly is in the moment, but it's like you were just talking about. He's on his deal, you're on yours, and they're just not going to be consistent any longer. They served their time.
Exactly. 2 years of a great job got me through what I needed to do. I've been living comfortably in my house up there. Now it's time to look at the next steps. Right,
to progress on. Yeah, absolutely. So that leads me right to here, man. And seems like in that way we're in similar shoes. I'm fresh out of the job and exploring the unknown now too. And the idea, I suppose, is just to do this, really, to talk to other people who are doing the same thing on their own journeys through podcasts specifically, and through writing the books. Obviously, I'm trying to go more public with that. I've put my name fully and formally on all the books now, which I was previously hesitant to do because of aviation. Obviously, the two careers don't really jive.
Was that why you took the Traveling Nobody
that
moniker?
Initially, that was certainly it. There was sort of an artistic underpinning of that, too, which does fit with what I was saying earlier. It is simply that I've always kind of felt myself to be outside of any environment that I was within, or just someone taking it in as if anyone would take it in, just that unbiased sort of perception or whatever. That always seemed to kind of be a core part of my being for whatever reason. And so I did have specifics, obviously, throughout the story, but more of the task at hand was to exemplify through my particular story the journey. And then, of course, once I came into Campbell, it was like, yeah, there's a way to do this. And if you become very familiar with that, you could probably highlight some of these truths and wisdoms that apply to anyone. And if they're willing to see or absorb that, then surely there will be value in the work.
Your other books were the Visionary series.
Right. So that was the natural evolution of Psychedelic Hero's journey with the Traveling Nobody. And essentially the Visionary Quest series, they came after my second ayahuasca ceremony, that one in the United States where I had to quit my job.
Yeah.
So as I told you, I was trying to figure out real estate. I was really aimed at money more than anything else. And I wanted to stand on my own and all that, but I was still aimed at the dollar sign.
Well, you think that dollars mean independence at some point.
You can equate the two, and I certainly did at that time. Yeah.
I think everybody in America seems to equate the two. I mean,
and there's some undeniable truth to that, but
money makes things easier. I mean,
yeah, it can.
With the whole, you can't buy happiness, but you can buy a whole new set of problems.
Yes, and that's the thing to be aware of. And that's what I did for myself there. When I was aimed at the wrong thing, I was aiming at a whole new set of problems that were only going to generate more. Yeah. So, and just as a side note on this too, you know what one of the things was that really began to allow me to see this clearly? When I was working this last cargo job, I was very close to the end. It was becoming increasingly more and more unbearable.
You can feel the drain on yourself.
Oh, you could feel the drain on yourself because you're doing the same repetitive tasks you need to grow out of and all that. But the company was just straight up getting more absurd, more demanding. We'd work 16-hour days, man.
Ugh.
And that was sort of part of the job. I mean, we all signed up for it. We knew what we were doing there. But they would begin to scold us for getting food prior to a 16-hour day. I mean, just things like this is just absurd, absolutely absurd.
It reminds me, I worked at THQ, which is a game company, when I first moved to LA, trying to follow my dream screenwriting, and I ended up getting this job as a game tester, thinking, oh, it's going to be great. And I get in, they put me on the premiere team doing the PC games, which are apparently the hard to get into. And I get there the last quarter, they're like, okay, we tend to do 96-hour weeks or so. You don't have to come back home. you can sleep. We've got these couches here. It's just like, oh, so this is why everybody burns out.
That's just that machine mind run amok again, man.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I lasted that one quarter, and then I was done. And I went into IT and operations and moved on to a new journey.
Even that's impressive to last a quarter under such conditions.
It was not pleasant, but I have to tip my hat to the people who can actually stand through there and make it through those fires and turn something creative out of it.
Yeah, for sure. It's like sprinting, though. By definition, you can't do it forever. You got to stop.
Yeah.
But the company doesn't seem to understand that.
No.
And that's just that machine mind. That's what I was saying. Seems sort of to be happening at large here in the world. Just
I agree.
Getting worse. Yeah. So anyway, with all of that, it just came to its natural end, and it stuck me here into Austin with the next series of books. So back to that Visionary Quest series. That's really what I'm trying to run with now, because I feel like it has much of that everyman perspective sculpted and molded in a way that is entertaining and hopefully useful too. I was working with a marketing company for the books to help design covers that were pretty legit and all of this. And one of the people I was working with said, they're sort of like psychedelic parables. Like a parable has a moral, this, that, and the other. And I said, yeah, I guess they are. And in short, what they are is they're short books, which are just the trip reports. They're a couple thousand words per chapter, about 11 chapters per book. that traces my integration of these lessons through. I actually lived them out. So quitting jobs and going through heartbreaks and all of this and all of the other
opening yourself up very intimately for everybody there.
That's essentially what it's been. I mean, as much as I can, the task has been to be as authentic as is possible, put it out there, and then hopefully that'll connect you to the next thing you need in the world. And so that's what's happening right now.
So we've talked a lot about the hero's journey and living authentically. I want to kind of touch on how might we recognize things like that in our own lives? Where do you suggest people pay attention?
That's a good question. It's different for everyone, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's tough to give any kind of blanket statement, but I will, of course. I'll give an abstract one that I think,
like it.
Yeah, that I think holds true. So my path has been this visionary path, and yours certainly seems to involve elements of the psychedelics too.
Absolutely.
It seems like.
I think plant medicine can help the world.
Oh, absolutely. And I do too, or we think that as well, because we have seen the benefits from them, and we have understood that on a personal level. I'm not sure that that's going to be the case for everyone, at least depending on where they are in their journey. I do also agree. I think everyone could probably benefit from a psychedelic experience, but should they choose to want to integrate it and understand it?
And that's it. It's a difference between, okay, let's do this, and okay, let's sit with this.
Yeah.
And there is a big difference. I do think it takes experimental. I mean, it takes, just diving in that first one and realizing, okay, there is more. Now I want to sit back and look at it. But I think I was wondering if it was similar to you. Like for me, getting quieter in my own head is what led me to be able to hear that inner voice a little bit clearer.
That's good. And then that actually is a perfect segue into the abstract point I was going to make there. I was simply saying maybe that's been part of our journey, the psychedelics, and a big part of mine, obviously, with writing through those lenses.
Yeah.
For sure. But if I were to give how can you get in touch with this journey, I think what you said really hits the nail on the head, or something very close to it. Just knowing that call to adventure is for each and every one of us. And it comes forth to us, to ourselves, probably from the capital S self. It's a call to development, to grow, and to learn in the world. And you can hear that. And you probably wouldn't even argue with this, or most wouldn't. But then, of course, as we were talking about, you might deny it. You might say, I can't do that. That doesn't fit within my job structure. How am I going to go out to the desert for a month? I've got a job.
Yeah.
I can't do this.
Yeah. How am I going to go take this road trip for a month and a half? You just got to do it sometimes.
You just got to do it. Yeah. So if there's anything that I find myself saying more and more, which I think is generally applicable, it doesn't have anything to do with the psychedelics, but it has everything to do with the fact that I have found, which is that you are that hero of your life. You are the individual. And the hero has his or her calls to adventure that iterate over and over again. And if you take them, you are now initiating a version of the journey, a cycle of it for yourself. And that is something to engage in. It is potentially the most worthwhile thing to engage in, because you're developing your understanding, you're deepening your picture of reality. And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about before. If you do that, now you're giving yourself the best chance to find the kingdom of heaven within.
Yes.
Yeah, which can be how you see the world without too, kind of thing. Yeah.
I think that the Christian culture that we tend to grow up in the West lost touch with meditation, which is just prayer in another form as well. There's just different ways of looking and thinking at things. And as I see your chakras over here, it actually brings me to one of the things that one of my realizations from one of my trips is that our crown chakra, that silver string that's there, I almost feel like that is calling out from our idealized future. One of the, it's attached to all of the multiverse possibilities that we could, evolve through with our choices in this realm. But if that voice is speaking out to us and you're actually listening to it consciously, you're getting advice from the future self that you want to be.
That's beautiful. That's truly beautiful. I've had a really parallel interpretation of intuition.
Yes.
During the trip. Yeah. Intuition essentially showed me something very similar. The concept, I guess, was presented as being what you just kind of said. I almost physically had a view of it in the grid work hyperspace of reality. And intuition was like the compass by which you can navigate that is calibrated to the most developed self or something like that.
At any given point, we're faced with all these branches of time, but if you're listening to yourself, you can choose the ones that are going to be more valuable for you.
That's a really good way to put it, too. And that applies as well to the call to adventure, right? Because you're listening to yourselves call from the future, from a place of more higher developed presence or something, yeah.
Now, there are three main subsections for, the hero's journey that,
Right.
roughly broke down into the 3-act structure of movies and stuff like that, and books, anything when you're going with there. The first, there's separation, initiation, and return, right?
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about separation.
Yeah, separation, I just put that on what we're talking about right now. That's the call to adventure.
Yes.
As far as I think about these things nowadays is more or less like it should actually be pretty simple. So I'm really glad you brought that up in the 3-act process. That's sort of what it is. Separation, what is that? It's the call to adventure. That's simple. Something that may happen to you in your life or some intuition that you get which tells you to do something that you ordinarily wouldn't do. Most likely.
And that would be like the refusal to the call, right? Where
That-
you're like,
that's-
no.
That certainly could be. And just to give you a concrete on that, not too long ago, the last major vision quest I took was out in the desert here in Texas. And I was similarly, again, in a forced meditation. I had an all-night flight that particular day, and it was during the day, so I was trying to sleep, to rest up and do the responsible thing. Of course, I couldn't. And what came to me was go out to the desert for 4 days and 4 nights and merge with Source. That was essentially it. And I said, oh man, I don't know. I had never done anything like that before. I never spent 4 days and nights in the wilderness alone. I never even really backroaded.
Really?
Yeah, and where I went ended up requiring that. Unfortunately, my vehicle was able to handle it.
Good?
Yeah.
I wouldn't do that in my Mustang right now.
No, not the best of options. A Wrangler is what I have, so that worked out pretty well for that. But anyway, the point I'm making there is I just gave myself all of these excuses why I shouldn't do this. And this is someone who's generally aware of this process unfolding, right? So even me or whatever. I mean, we could all do this because there's nothing different about me. We're all the same hero. So what the hero says a lot of times is, nah, I'm not going to jump in. Jump into the unknown. Yeah, why the hell
I'm
would
pretty
I do
comfortable right now. Do I really want to do that?
that? Yeah, why? I mean, just... And so that's a real part of it. But assuming that you see that, resistance and you do it anyway for whatever reason, now I think you give yourself the best chance to productively deal with the unknown. Because it's like the unknown's probably coming anyway, right? One way or the other. And a good counterexample maybe is a relationship.
Now, could the unknown be considered that supernatural aid in either direction, good or bad? Or how do you look at that?
I don't. I think the unknown is the territory. It is essentially like the next stage of the journey, I guess, the initiation, in which you're immersed in the underworld. So within there, you can run into supernatural aids, I think, or at least that's the way I frame it. But that's sort of like chaos, and I don't mean just pure destruction. It certainly can be, but
Chaos has a bad rep.
right. But the positive side of chaos is Genesis too.
Absolutely. Well, you, like the Phoenix that we talked
Yeah.
about, you have to tear down to build back up.
That's it, man. You both are required elements of the process, yeah. And so that seems to be what you are in the unknown, in chaos. And the reason I say voluntarily too is because if you're just rocked by that, there can be the impulse to just shut down and shield and just weather the storm, batten the hatches, and all of this, and not really gain a ton from it. Now, chaos is rough. I mean, it can be extremely damaging and such. So it's nothing necessarily to play around with, but it seems like if you know the potential of it really wrecking you and you go in as fortified as you possibly can, now you give yourself a chance to navigate in there, I think. And I know this all sounds abstract, but I think there's real value there. that you know, at least in some sense, the outline, of the journey. Yeah.
If you are unaware, then you're still stumbling.
Yeah.
If you're aware, then you're at least stumbling with direction.
Right. And that might be all that is required, just to have a little bit direction. I often think about this too, like being out at sea with nothing at all other than being on a ship. You've got no compass, nothing. That sucks. That might be like the first version of what you just put forth there. You're just stumbling. Now, if you have a compass, that might not immediately lead you to land, but hell, it's a lot better than not having that compass.
Right?
Yeah.
It also reminds me a little bit, do you know Jordan Peterson at all?
Oh, absolutely. I'm reading his new book now. Actually, just read some this morning. Yeah.
I need to get that here soon. But I listen to a lot of his podcasts, a lot of his lectures and stuff, and he talks about that aim.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have a high aim. And if you're stumbling around, but you're at least aiming in the right direction, you're a whole lot more likely to hit that or something close than, crashing back to earth.
Yeah, I watch one of his videos on that topic often, and it almost always brings me to tears if I pay attention to it. And his tagline, and that which usually does it for me, is you might be wishing on the wrong star, but at least it's a star. At least it's in the sky, and at least it moved you forward. Yeah, I think there's so much truth to that. And what the hell do you know? Anyway, that's what he says. It's like, you don't know what pure paradise itself would be because you don't have that interpretive structure yet ready and able to even appreciate it or integrate it. Certainly not. So that's like the heroic cycle to my mind. It's giving you the depth necessary to find the Godhead, maybe.
So then explain a little bit about what you see as supernatural aid.
So,
because that's still in the separation phase, right?
Yeah, I guess so. Supernatural aid would be
right before crossing the threshold.
The threshold. Yeah, I guess it would be.
Now, I'm sure that supernatural aid also, you would see it throughout your journey.
Throughout the journey, yeah.
But it's the first recognition, maybe?
The thing that comes to mind immediately is like the mentor. Mm-hmm. So especially when it is in the separation stage. This is Obi-Wan for Luke.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
That example that we're all super familiar with. And yeah, you're right. I guess that is typically, that is where it is in the hero's journey. I, by direct experience, almost never think about it being at that place.
We all come to it in a weird way, right?
And I only say that because it has seemed to me that I use it or I seek it out when I'm getting rocked, when I'm in the unknown and chaos. But yeah. So the purpose of the mentor, I suppose, would be to, I think, point at the moon. Like the Buddhist phrase would say, it's the finger pointing at the moon. And of course, in that situation, you don't look at the finger too terribly long. You look upon the moon. But if you did not know the moon was there, the finger would be really useful. Mm-hmm. You might argue it would be absolutely necessary for the mentor or the guru even, or the aide, to point you in the direction that you need to go. However, then the journey is upon you. They could aid, but they can't do it for you.
And that would be crossing the threshold.
Then I suppose, they're pointing you toward the threshold, right?
And as you've accepted it, you're going there. Now you go through the initiation.
Yep. And
that would be, it starts with the belly of the whale.
Yeah, so this I think most people understand is the dark night of the soul.
Oh, yeah.
It's just as simple as that, where you're completely committed to the journey. You can't get out of it. You're at the darkest possible point of it. You're Jonah in the whale.
Yeah.
Yeah. So from here, you're looking at the void, I guess, right? To tie it back to that trip. And I guess the way that I talk about that when I do is, what do you do in the presence of that? What is there to do? What would a person do? Whatever you can, in some sense, to move forward on the journey. You can't quit. I guess that is what that stage represents, is it's beyond the point of quitting. If you were to just quit, you would just die.
Yeah.
You would just be lost in the void. And that's not really an option to life itself or intelligence itself.
At least it's not one that we aim for.
No, maybe it is despair. I mean, maybe this is part of the reason people could get caught in chaos, because you do get caught in meaninglessness, perhaps, in the void. I guess that's a good point. It's possible. But I don't think that's where any person ultimately wants to be, if you've given the choice.
Yeah.
Right?
you may stick yourself there for indeterminate amounts of time as you're processing or dealing with things, but hopefully your goal is to get out of there.
Right. And so that leads us back to what do you do when you're in that position, when you're facing the dark night of the soul? And that's why I say, I think just practically whatever you can to aim at a star to move forward.
And that'd be the road of trials.
Yeah, from doing whatever you can, it's not as if it's just given to you.
Yeah.
Now you're given, I think, the opportunity to actually sculpt your tools in the journey, to sculpt your philosophies, to sculpt what's going to actually work for you. It's like you're given the rule set or something of in the unknown, and you have to go through suffering, the dark night of the soul, in order to understand there's new rules here. What you were previously working with is not going to work. So now it seems like you're given tests in order to help you learn that new rule set, but it's not any kind of answer that's given to you at the end of the day. You know what I mean? So this goes back to what I was telling you before when I jumped out of my pilot job and to go into real estate. I thought this was the call to adventure. I'm going to go do this and things are going to work out. Well, no, that's not the way it worked. I was given the new rule set. I was shown thieves, liars, assholes, everything, all of the above. And it was up to me to then navigate there with those examples, those trials. And that did force me in that way to integrate the shadow, to complexify my view of man and to get rid of this naive notion that we all basically want the best for each other, because that's simply not true.
I'd like to think we do. I try to live that way myself, but I don't necessarily put that intention into others. Yeah,
it doesn't seem like it's going to hold up, unfortunately. And that's why I was saying before, I had previously kind of viewed the world as though everyone had had their 5 grams and saw the benefits of that. But they haven't. The world is not exactly that way. So the road of trials does give you the opportunity to take in reality, I guess, to exercise a right view through the trials. Yeah.
So then there's also meeting with the goddess, which we talked a little bit about in your journey before. And temptation.
Yeah. Real quick on meeting with the goddess, I think that's necessarily after the road of trials because this process is rough.
Yeah.
So it could kind of root you in some darker elements of yourself, more assertive elements of yourself than maybe are completely balanced. So then after that, it seems like the meeting with the feminine spirit, the receptive spirit, the loving spirit is actually almost required to sort of rejuvenate an element of yourself that's going to be necessary to propel you through the journey, because it's obviously not about being all assertive all the time, and it's not about the opposite, but it's a balancing of masculine and feminine.
It's very interesting you say that, because I've had this vision a couple of times while we've been talking, and it's very much like you and I get this feeling about you tend to have a very masculine side. You were raised in the testosterone era of, manliness. You're supposed to be out there and, go there. But it's really about integrating those both parts into your whole and finding a comfortable balance, like you said, integrating the feminine from the goddess and realizing that you can still have your masculinity, you can still have your assertiveness and who you are, but that you have to open up to both.
Yeah, it's required to balance both the middle way.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that's a important point of the journey that does necessarily come after the road of trials, and then from there at temptation. Now, temptation, I kind of lost my thread on this earlier, man, but I'm glad we're back to it. So I was talking about how my job was getting increasingly unbearable, right? So I was up in the cockpit, I was flying one of the last flights, and I was listening to a podcast that talked about this. I didn't just think of it myself. But the figure 8 symbol, right, the infinity, that is a complete version of the money symbol, if you think about it.
It's the, what was it? The line in between the cash actually stops it from completing.
It's the bar. It's barring it off.
Barring it off. Yeah. That's what it was.
That's exactly it. Yeah. And I drew that out during that flight, and I just said to myself, it's either a path of money or a path of source. And quite literally, the money is representation of half of it being barred off. The God of man is half of actual source, that type of thing. So that, as tied to temptation, seems self-evident, right? Like money, materiality. Like
that's our main temptation in this world, is the physical, And money is our identification with that in the West for sure.
Well, yeah, just materiality. I mean, in general. Yeah, and like the money symbol just seems to be a good representation of that in one thing, for sure. It is also super noteworthy, too, that the way the 17-stage cycle is broken down, temptation is about the 6 o'clock position of the circle.
Okay.
Which would be the antithesis, the exact polar opposite of the 12 o'clock position, obviously. And I don't know if Campbell ever did that himself, but if you check that out behind you, I have at the 12 o'clock position the figure 8, which is like where you come from and where you return to, source itself.
Absolutely.
So source being like the opposite end of the spectrum from where temptation is, from where the money symbol is.
I like that.
Yeah, so that's something to watch out for, because it could get you. You could be caught in the illusion. And if you're navigating with a flawed set of navigational principles or something, or tools, you're never going to get to any kind of destination at all. You're just going to be adrift.
So how do you move from temptation into atonement with the Father?
Yeah, atonement with the Father is one that I've experienced quite literally with my father throughout the journey. Yeah. And the exact draw from being caught in the illusion into a atonement, a recognition of the Father, and not only that, of the death of the Father too. That's another psychological trope that I think is within the cycle. It's when the person comes to understand that they really are leading their life, they're manning their ship, there is no one else, including the father figure, that is able to help them anymore. That recognition and simultaneous acceptance of it, of sort of that you are the father of your life too, that is key.
I really like that. I also like language play. So like atone is one I've always liked, because it's at one. You become at one with the person that you're trying to go through. So it's called out to me for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then when you get to that point, I think Carl Jung actually said this can happen metaphorically, especially for a man and his father, that the father can sort of metaphorically die. I think Freud more held that it had to be a literal death. Like when a person's father literally dies, well, then they don't have that as an option any longer. Yeah. In any case, I think the point that we both were making there is what holds.
Yes.
Yeah.
So then explain apostasis a little bit.
Yeah, so this is death, basically. This is, and I'm sure you're very familiar with this through your knowledge of the hero's journey when it applies to script and such. Isn't it common for the hero to almost have to appear to be dead, or to go through some kind of...
The point of no return.
Yes, okay. There it is. So absolute no return, right. And that could be thought of as a death of the version of you that started the journey, like the full formal death of it.
The phoenix before the rising.
Yep. As simple as that. And that's often how I think about that one. So I guess up until that point, there's still been parts of you that have survived or have hung on, even though you're developing other parts of yourself.
But you're clinging to those things.
Right.
That's part of it.
I think so. I think that could be it. And now you get to some event or circumstance, whatever, and that's no longer possible. But not only is it no longer possible because of the journey, it's like you recognize it again, because in the step before, you've atoned, right? At one with the Father, you are the Father, so you are no longer the Son. You see, you've released this. And because of doing so, now you are emboldened and enabled to proceed.
You're not the son or the daughter, you're your own individual.
Yep.
So then what's the ultimate boon?
The ultimate treasure. Okay, this one I have a super concrete answer for, although it's really abstract.
I like concrete and abstract, so let's hear it.
I think what this is this is the treasure. That's really what it is, the ultimate treasure of a quest, which could be thought of as a truth, a lesson, all of these things, obviously. But what I think it really is for every one of us is highest and best personal use. That's what I think the treasure is. And I think all of our journeys are to seek highest and best personal use.
What's calling out to your individual self.
Yep. And how could you best be used in the world for yourself? But then, of course, not only in that way, but if you find that, which again, I think is so real, I think it's a hyper real pathway within the matrix of life. If you find that thing, your calling, your purpose, maybe in the world, now by integrating that, not to totally jump ahead, but by bringing that into the world, returning that to the collective, you simultaneously find the best way to be for the good of your fellow man as well.
Well, and that leads directly into that, and that's the possible refusal of return, where you're debating with yourself if you're going to be doing this, basically, right?
Yeah.
And then the return, like you just said, is the last of the three acts, right?
Right.
So that's when you're bringing your gifts back into your everyday life. You're utilizing that not just for yourself, like you said. For me, it's weird to be talking about it as freely as I do at this point, but years ago, I felt called to build a self-sustained planned community. And that is the direction that things are starting to finally line up for. And that's actually part of the reason I took this trip, was to look for property out here and start to look at the path of where that's going to be. I think I mentioned Kerrville as a kid and things like that. So I'm definitely, this is the area that's calling out that I need to be in. And I just see my value in that community is not for myself as much as to help the others that I can bring into it.
Yeah, right.
And so I try and keep that as my ideal along my journey wherever I'm going. But getting to that point is the actual path. Right?
Well, yeah, it's work.
Yeah.
I mean, for sure, it's not as if you found this thing and you're fairly certain it is correct, but now you actually have to bring that home.
You have to keep listening to that voice. You have to keep getting to those places. So in the return, what's the magic flight?
I don't remember. No, I think Magic Flight is something along the lines of, because the next one is Rescue with Wow,
yes.
Right? Yeah. So
Is that
we'll skip Magic Flight because I'm not 100% sure what Campbell specifically would have meant by that. I don't exactly recall. But I think that, and certainly wrapping into the Rescue from Without, is when you are still in the underworld. You're still in the unknown. And seemingly you have your direction set, but for whatever reason you can't quite make it back because the journey changes you.
Yes.
I mean, fundamentally. I think this applies to many people in their lives. When you take your call, you go out, you go do something, maybe years have gone by, and now for some people, myself included, it's very difficult to interact with friends and family that you previously had at the beginning of the journey, right?
They expect you to be one version of yourself that you are no longer.
Yeah, exactly. So part of the rescue, I think, is sort of like supernatural aid, almost in the sense that you get any number of circumstances delivered to you that tells you the goal probably should be to connect with this new thing that you found, the treasure, highest and best use that you found. So although you were alienated from the known world in the journey previous to that point, once you have found the highest and best use and you have confidence in it, you should want to bring that forth not only to the world, but also like your previous world too, because that's still a part of it. You know, it's integral. You really do want to connect.
Well, Jordan Peterson talks about that when he goes into the Pinocchio analogy, and he starts pulling out from the movie there, where you're actually rescuing your father from the belly of the whale instead of just yourself. You're actually pulling that forward, and you're bringing it to your past as well.
Yeah. So you can really understand.
Yes.
To the best of your ability, what happened there, what the whole point was. Yeah. I think about this often too in the levels of consciousness psychologically. So without going into all of them, they're very simple. Of course, they could be broken down in all kind of different ways, but it's pretty well revered that psychologically there are like 5 levels of awareness or consciousness. And the first one is egoic. The next is ethnocentric, meaning you understand the rules. You could listen to the rules of society. The one above that would be meaning. So you can touch on the actual meaning of them. You don't have to abide by all rules because you know what the actual meaning is. Above that is integral. So that, I think, ties to what we're talking about here. It's, you've been in the world of meaning for long enough that you don't, of course you don't need to follow any rules, but now the work is not to understand the meaning. You've done that. But the next integral stage is to speak the language of those you are seeking to connect with, so that you effectively have brought that meaning forth into the world. You have done your work, or whatever.
That would be the crossing the return threshold.
I think so. I think that element of it speaks to that, because you're attempting to initiate the integration stage, and that's sort of what that is. And this might not almost be self-evident at first. Once you find the highest and best use in all of this, you might just think, well, I'm going to continue on in this world, in this magical world, or whatever that you've developed for yourself. But I don't think that's the point. I think the point is to return the information home, to begin that process. And
to help the next generation or the next...
Because it's a cycle.
Exactly.
For sure. Yeah, it's cyclical, for sure. And anyway, I guess take home I'm trying to make on that is it's not clear all the time that should happen. So some things often guide you in that way. And it might just be that you're constantly isolated and alienated, and you realize, this sucks. What's the point of this? It's not that the journey has been pointless. It's just that maybe your view of it now needs to evolve, and that's to begin the initiation part of the return.
Yeah.
Which can be Magic Flight. You're magically sort of being returned to the value at hand here, and then rescue from without by aids that are going to help you in that process.
And then after you've brought all those back, after you've integrated them into your life, that's when you're almost the master of two worlds. You've got your past and your present while you're helping people with the future as well.
Yep. Something along those lines. You have balanced the feminine and the masculine, the non-physical and the physical, of course, all of these binaries that there are. And now from this point, hopefully, you are able to enjoy a full appreciation of the entire cycle, which is not just that there are many, we descend into the many from the one, or something like this, and then that could be the illusion, right? From there, the hero says, well, no, I'm proceeding toward the one, only the one, there is only one. Then you get up to the one, if you've done all this, you've integrated, and now you say, well, what next? Of course, another iteration, but if you go through again, hopefully the understanding there is, well, the many are comprised of the one. See, this is like the non-dual understanding of the real thing, yeah.
And then that would take you to the freedom to live, where you're actually...
I think that's it. Yeah, I think that's the freedom to live. If you've sought to understand as much as you can, and you've gotten to a point where you don't fear anything any longer, because what's the point? You've realized the one and the many and the one, and you've seen the thing play itself out, then you don't have the fear. It's just not present. You just have love and that liberation, freedom.
Well, you talked a bit about portals and the multiverse. I know we touched a little bit on it, but the way I heard you describe portals almost feels like chapter points in a choose your own adventure. So the way I see it is like I showed you that branching time where you're at that decision point. There are always obstacles that life is putting in your path, and you're having to choose from there. It's through those choices you can continue either along the current consensus reality that we've kind of built, or that we assume there's this one world that we're living in, right? Or maybe talk about switching over into a new reality that might be more suitable for your current level of awakening.
Yeah.
So is that similar to how you see it?
Yeah, similar. I think it is sort of like a track change or something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
I've thought about this in a few different ways, but yeah, in the past, I guess traditionally for me, I think we are presented with these track changes time in and time out. And when they come into our lives, and of course you could call this a call to adventure too, but you sort of recognize it. You just know it. There's a gravity to the situation at hand. And I think you are, in a very practical way, faced with a fork. You could do this or you could do that, and you kind of have the knowing there behind it that it's going to fundamentally change.
Have you heard the, I think it's Nietzsche's phrase, time is a flat circle?
Yeah.
I did a post on Twitter at one point about that and the torus field. So if you look at the torus field from above, it actually would look like a flat circle spiraling into itself. Mm-hmm. And so I could totally see that where you're with those infinite possibilities, you're not necessarily like switching, but it's like you said, a track change. You're just going into that next level up, or maybe the next level down. It kind of depends on where you're at.
Yeah. I have also thought about it though too, that let's say the multiverse does exist, right? And I don't think this is a hard sell at all if you'll accept that it does seemingly have the possibility to exist. I guess mainstream physics is essentially able to prove this somehow, some way that I don't understand. It's for damn sure. But
mathematically, they can't unify physics without some level of multidimensionality.
Right. So if we're to accept just the infinite universe theory, that's everything has existed and does simultaneously. All information is just there, present. Well, the way that perhaps we are navigating through infinite information is through consciousness, through life, through the heroic journey. And specifically, though, I think then every instant is an ability to do what I was just talking about, to course correct or change tracks or something like that.
Move closer to that higher calling.
Yeah, move closer to it, or not.
Or not. You can choose to take as far down as you want.
Right, because it's all free will. I mean, this dimension definitely pivots on free will. And so you have it available to you at every moment. And that kind of pairs nicely, too, with what we were talking about before with what depression is. It's like getting caught in a loop of forecasting the world in a certain way, which is fundamentally probably not even true, but it doesn't matter to you subjectively because you're caught within those binds. So it's empowering seemingly to think about the world that way. And I have at various times in my life even deliberately tried to implement that, to say, hey, I have agency here and I could course correct anytime, anywhere really, right? And that's impossible to argue with, and at the same time, like I said, rather empowering. So I think about that in a tool-like manner, that it could be used productively.
While we're on this, and before we wrap up, thank you so much for your time, by the way. Have you ever thought much about the simulation theory?
I have, and we talked a little bit earlier about this through notes, but yeah, I think it stands to reason that we are not in base level reality. And sorry, I kind of interrupted you, but that seems terrifying, actually, in many ways. But I'm just kind of joking. I'm not surprised at all if that were to be found to be true.
Well, like you're saying, the base level reality we talked about a little bit before, with just between the two of us. It's increasingly less likely that we're in base reality if we are working towards a system where we could plug in and have our consciousness there. So if we're working towards that, and we're going to eventually, we think, and science right now says we're going to get there, where we can basically create a world that's indistinguishable from reality. That kind of leads me to wonder if there are questions of freedom, free will, as well as virtual slavery. On one of my trips, I actually heard, when I was talking with somebody that was or was not me, the phrase "trapped in a tryptamine prison." As tryptamines, like mushrooms, acid, DMT, all of these things, they unlock some of those abilities for us to... Actually, what I think it does is it takes away some of the filters that our brain already imposes on the world to give us the general structure we see in day-to-day life. So would a tryptamine prison, doesn't that sound like a kind of a description of a matrix?
Yeah, tryptamine prison, do you mean like life normally when we're just sober?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like we're trapped to our senses in here. Yeah. And then the tryptamines actually help us unlock or get rid of some of those filters that are already overlaid on top of us.
Right. That makes perfect sense. Yeah, I understand you clearly. Yeah, I think so. I think that's kind of what is happening in one way or the other. And this goes to very ancient ideas about the grand illusion, about Maya, right? Maya. The same thing, yeah. In the clear white light. I did once have a dream where I did exit the whole thing. And it was a dream. It was not a trip. Not that it matters too much, but that's where it came from. And so I literally was proceeding through, my consciousness was this portal, I guess. It was a tunnel, really, sort of a space like almost as if I was on a ship of some sort, spaceship. And I was opening these doors, and eventually I got to the clear white light, which was just that. It was like the whole thing was leading you to that source or something like, and the whole thing by that, I mean like life. Yeah.
All right. So I talked about this a little bit on the intro at one point. So I'll go ahead and talk about it again here. I don't talk about it often, but before I got arrested, I was in the middle of a conversation with a friend of mine. We were talking about breeding cannabis, and I had a small mushroom chocolate that somebody had told me was a cannabis chocolate. So there was some tryptamine involved in all of this, but it was a spontaneous, I was in my kitchen, spontaneously just stopped. All of a sudden, to Dan, the person I was talking to, he didn't notice any difference as far as me being gone. For me, all of a sudden, I was absorbed in a white light of all pure feeling. There was no like one feeling. It was just a feeling of feelings. I was stuck there, and I heard myself, this is it. I can stay here, or I can live life. And then all of a sudden I was back in my kitchen. Time did this very weird speed up thing where I like couldn't, I was not in charge for a little while. Oh, man. And, after I got arrested because my ex called the cops, I was actually in the back of the cop car coming down off of whatever this was, but it felt like I was still in that white light. And it felt like I could see people hovering over me telling me that, no, he's got to go back in. It's not time yet. It's not his time. And it was a very weird feeling, like, I don't know, to link it back to Matrix or Neo, like somebody was trying to make sure I was still plugged in for a little while.
I still had the jack in the back of the head.
It's a very interesting experience, and not one I have repeated since. So,
yeah, man, that's really wild. And that is telling in terms of what we're talking about, too. I don't really even think that there's much sense to argue with that kind of experience, because it seems to be reported in the whole near-death space and all of that, too. Category of experience that is something like the clear white light. Of course, that has all kind of hang-ups associated with it, with religion and all
absolutely
that. But yeah, is there some kind of underpinning basis to that? There might very well be. Both of us certainly have had the experience, and we're just kind of comparing notes on it.
Do you think that do you feel for yourself that it's that calling that you're still here to do more that keeps you?
Yeah, I think so. I really do. When you talk about all of this, what it comes down to me is it's really cool to talk about these things. It's fun. We both enjoy it, obviously.
Yeah.
But there's got to be a kind of rubber meets the road somewhere, right? There's traction. There's got to be traction somewhere. So if we talk about void, say pure nihilism and meaninglessness and all of this, and we say, I was telling you earlier, I've kind of been there, and you were to say, oh, yeah, that sounds terrifying. Yeah, it was. And now we talk about sort of the opposite end of that, this pure bliss, white light. They're both, I guess, equally cool to talk about. But within our day in, day out lives, they are insufficient motivators, seemingly, at least to me. So where rubber does meet the road for me really is with the heroic cycle and then living that out. Because ultimately, I am not the Godhead. I am not the infinite. I am here as a representation of it. So too are you, and we all are. But within our lives, we are a limited version of that is able to understand and experience whatever it can. And the way that it can do so is by exploring productively the cycle, I think, or something along those lines. So I don't spend a ton of time worrying about the clear white light or the void. You know, it's like either one.
I think trying to get to either one will actually cause you not to.
That might be extremely valid too. And that goes to the Buddha's ideas about when he was asked of the afterlife to just reply with thunderous silence. It's like, I'm not gonna go there. That's sort of beside the point, man. Yeah. So I think similarly that happens to be the case. Now, if you say to yourself though too, and this is a very Peterson thing to say, what is going to look better in my life as a philosophy. Nihilism or something that is growth-centric. That's undeniable. It's growth-centric. It certainly is. If you've ever gotten decent at anything in your life ever, you know that it's just better when you develop a certain amount of confidence to play that game than it was when you were the fool. But they're both part of the process. The only point I'm making is it's more enjoyable. It's more fun when you grow in understanding. And I just cannot fundamentally get away from growth there. I think that's key.
I think it is as well. It reminds me very much of bodhisattvas and, the idea that once you're awake, it's almost your duty to come back and help others and make sure that you can elevate everybody to those kind of levels.
Right, to end the suffering of your fellow man, that would be the charge, yeah.
Absolutely. I can't think of a better way to end this. Thank you so much for your time. Before we go, what's the best way for people to find you or get your books and any of that?
Yeah, thank you. TravelingNobody.net is where everything is linked up. And there's also a new podcast I'm going to just start now, or have been starting, Traveling No Buddies, where we do the same exact thing, sit down and compare notes, and that will also be linked through TravelingNobody.net.
Awesome. Hope to have you back again.
Thank you very much, my friend.
Thank you again for listening. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. I had a blast talking to the Traveling Nobody, and it was definitely a thought-provoking conversation. I want to thank him and also give a special thanks to all of our listeners. You are the reason I'm doing this. Please tell your friends about us, follow us on Spotify, subscribe to us on YouTube or wherever else you're listening, and please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcast. Every podcast says that because it really does help with visibility. You can also support us on Patreon or connect with us on the social media of your choice. We are at Awakened Exchanges on Facebook and Instagram, and at Awaken Exchanges on Twitter. Thanks again, and have a blessed day.